There's a famous American pastor, theologian, author, speaker called Tim Keller. He's really famous. But what he's most famous for is looking like Bishop Cyril Ashton. And this is what he once wrote. He wrote this: the vigorous continual planting of new churches is the single most crucial strategy for one, a numerical growth of the body of Christ in any city or town, and two, a continual corporate renewal and revival of existing churches in a city or town. Nothing else, not crusades, outreach programs, parachurch ministries, growing megachurches, nor church renewal processes will have the consistent impact of dynamic, extensive church planting. This is an eyebrow-raising statement, but to those who have done any study at all, it's not even controversial. Some of you are already planters. Some of you are aspiring planters. Some of you are leaders of planters. Some of you know this stuff, maybe need reminding. Some of you don't know it and need, persuading. For all of you, please hear me for the next 7 or 8 minutes maximum. By the end of this, I hope you will understand that if we are to transform any town or city, we need to plant. And our goal in transforming Wigan, where I am based, is to plant over 150 new plants. It is one of the main goals for transforming Wigan. And we are doing this because we believe what Tim Keller has just said. Anybody who looks like Bishop Cyril needs to be taken seriously. And here, very briefly, here's why planting is so absolutely crucial and vital to any plant being won for, any town being won for Jesus. I've got 4 very quick reasons. Firstly, because our Bibles tell us so. There is no direct command to plant churches in our Bibles. It simply isn't there. But it is insinuated. It's even presumed everywhere. It begins with the Great Commission. Jesus didn't just say, make disciples. He said, baptize them. And throughout our New Testament, it is clear baptism means incorporation into some kind of church community. From the very beginning, evangelism in our New Testament is seen in the context of community and therefore of planting communities. And the apostles took it seriously. All of them were involved in planting communities of disciples in the places they ended up at. And Apostle Paul, of course, who was the greatest evangelist and missionary in history, was, of course, a church planter. If you read Acts, you'll find that he had a twofold strategy. First, he went to the biggest city in the region, and secondly, he planted some kind of church in that city. Somebody once said, if you want a Christianity that looks like Acts, you need to commit to planting churches. It was true for the New Testament church. It is true for us now. Secondly, because the evidence tells us so. Those who study this stuff tell us that the only way to ensure that you increase the number of people who are following Jesus is to increase the number of churches that you are planting. Because unless evangelism is done in the context of churches or missional communities, whatever, then experience shows us that the mandate to make and grow disciples simply doesn't work. And we will look at this in greater detail later on when we look at discipleship. And the hard evidence tells us that planting is focused or attracts those who are unchurched. Dozens of studies in every Western country, in every denomination, have confirmed that planting and church plant, it attracts unchurched people way more than established traditional churches do. The average new church plant, 60 to 80% of its members are unchurched. Churches that are over 10 years of age, and that is most of our established ones, 80 to 90% of their new members are transfers from other churches. New church plants, 60 to 80% of its new members are unchurched. If you're over 10 years of age, unfortunately, 80 to 90% of of your new members on average are transfers. The evidence tells us that planting best reaches new generations, new residents, new people groups. The evidence tells us that there are usually higher number of younger adults and young people found in new plants. It tells us new residents are more often attracted to new church plants. New socio-cultural groups are more often attracted to plants. It is why the leading missiologists like C. Peter Wagner can say, planting new churches is the most effective evangelistic methodology under heaven. The Bible tells us so. The evidence tells us so. And thirdly, because it is an effective way of reaching many, many contexts. No town or city or village is just one culture. Even a town like Wigan, which is seen as fairly monocultural, is made up of hundreds of different cultures, people and age groups, neighborhoods, networks. Somebody once described it like this: we think of a town or a city like a pancake, which is flat and uniform, homogeneous. Actually, it's much more like a waffle. Got lots of kind of little divots in them. And each of those different divots is a different subculture or group or demography or neighborhood or it's a network. If we're going to reach these people, we're going to need to plant in the divots. Each of those cultures, and one of the key points about planting, as we shall discover later on, is inherently targeted. It is nearly always focused on a particular neighborhood or network or type of person or age group or subculture. If we want to reach those people, we are going to need to plant. Fourthly and finally, it's an effective way of renewing the whole body of Christ. I wish I had more time to go through this, but all the evidence and research seems to point out that church communities that plant, they prosper. It brings new ideas. It renews discipleship. It develops leadership amongst young adults. It results in converts that often end back up in those churches that have planted. It results in greater numbers and greater giving in churches that plant. It is a great mistake to think we have to choose between church planting and church renewal. Both of them are vital to seeing the whole body of Christ renewed. I wish we had longer to go through this. I have more to actually say. There's more evidence on this. The argument is deeper and wider than we have time for, but please hear me. Hear me out on this. Planting is not a fad. It is not the latest church growth strategy. It's not something that we are going to grow bored with when we realize it's yet another thing that hasn't worked. It has been around from day one of the church. It has never disappeared, but we need to reclaim it for this generation. We need to renew it in our time. If we want to see our towns and cities transformed, then all of us are going to have to be involved in planting in some way or another. Some of us will lead plants. Some of us will be involved in it. Some of us will enable them to happen. What we cannot do is ignore them.